You won't believe what my stepmom asked me to do last weekend. I mean, we've had our ups and downs, but this was on a whole new level. It all started on a lazy Saturday afternoon. You know, one of those rare days when you don't have anything planned and life feels just a little less hectic. I was sitting on the couch in my favorite sweats, minding my own business, scrolling through TikTok videos of dancing dogs and recipes I'll probably never try. The house was unusually quiet, which should have been my first clue that something was up, but I was too comfortable to care. Enter my stepmom, Kathy. Now, let me give you a little background on Kathy. She's, well, let's just say she's full of surprises. One minute, she's the mom trying too hard to be cool, and the next, she's got you questioning everything you thought you knew about normal family dynamics. She's not mean or anything, just unpredictable, like the kind of unpredictable where you keep your guard up because you never know what's coming. Anyway, she strolls into the living room, all calm and collected, holding her phone like it's some kind of ancient scroll containing life-altering news. And with this overly dramatic tone, she says, "I need your help with something. It's important." Now, let me tell you, when Kathy says something's important, it could mean anything from needing help choosing between two shades of nail polish to plotting some elaborate family prank. So, naturally, I was skeptical. I put my phone down and looked at her, waiting for the punchline. But she didn't laugh. Instead, she sat down beside me, her eyes wide with this weird mix of excitement and nervousness. "Promise me you won't judge," she said, leaning in a little too close for comfort. Uh, okay, I replied, dragging the word out because, let's be honest, when someone asks you not to judge, it's usually because they're about to say something extremely judge-worthy. She took a deep breath, like she was about to confess to some deep, dark secret. And then she said it, the request that would turn my perfectly chill Saturday into an unforgettable saga I still can't wrap my head around. But here's the kicker. What she asked me to do wasn't just unexpected. It was borderline absurd, like the kind of absurd that makes you question whether you've accidentally wandered into the plot of a sitcom. I know you're dying to know what it was, but trust me, you'll want to hear the whole story before you form an opinion. Let's just say, by the time she finished explaining, I wasn't sure if I should laugh, cry, or start looking for hidden cameras. And what happened next? Oh, that's where things really get wild. So grab a snack, settle in, and get ready, because you're not going to believe where this story goes. So there I was, sitting on the couch, staring at Kathy like she just told me she was running for president or something. Her request? It was so out of left field, so completely random. I had to ask her to repeat it, just to make sure I wasn't hearing things. "I need you to help me train for a competition," she said, her voice all serious, like this was a life or death situation. "Wait, what kind of competition?" I asked, trying to keep my face straight. Because let's be real, the last time Kathy did anything remotely competitive, it involved a karaoke machine at a family barbecue, and let's just say she didn't exactly win any awards. She hesitated for a moment, then pulled out her phone and showed me this flyer. It was for some local event called the Ultimate Talent Showdown. Apparently, people of all ages could enter, and the winner would take home a shiny trophy and a $500 gift card. Now, I'll admit, $500 is nothing to scoff at. But here's where it got weird. Kathy wasn't planning to sing, dance, or do something normal like bake a cake. No, her talent was ventriloquism. Yes, you heard that right. She wanted to perform a comedy act with a ventriloquist dummy she'd bought online. I couldn't even hide my reaction. "Are you serious?" I asked, half laughing, half hoping this was some elaborate joke. She nodded, completely unfazed. "I've been practicing for weeks, but I need someone to be my, um, assistant." "Assistant?" For a ventriloquist act? I mean, how does that even work? Do I just stand there holding a sign that says, please clap? I had so many questions, but Kathy was already 2 steps ahead. She started explaining her vision for the act, which honestly sounded more like a chaotic circus than a comedy routine. Apparently, she wanted me to dress up in some ridiculous costume. She didn't specify what, but I'm guessing it involved sequins, and act as the straight man while she cracked jokes through her dummy. And the dummy? It wasn't your average puppet. It was this creepy, old-fashioned thing with eyes that looked like they could follow you around the room. Okay, Kathy said, clapping her hands. Let's start with the opening bit. The opening bit turned out to be a painfully awkward routine. As she kept talking, I couldn't decide if this was the most hilarious or most horrifying thing I'd ever heard. On one hand, the thought of Kathy trying to pull this off was pure comedy gold. On the other hand, the idea of being roped into her scheme. Let's just say I wasn't exactly thrilled. But then she hit me with the kicker. If we win, I'll split the prize with you. Now, $250 is a nice chunk of change. But was it worth the humiliation of being dragged on stage in front of a crowd of strangers? I wasn't so sure, and that's when she said something that changed everything, something that made it nearly impossible to say no. But I'll save that part for later. Trust me, it only gets crazier from here. Kathy's final words left me sitting there in stunned silence. If we win, I'll finally tell you the truth about what happened last Christmas, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly, like she knew she'd just thrown down the ultimate trump card. Now, before you think I'm overreacting, let me explain. Last Christmas, there was an incident, something involving a missing gift, a mysterious locked closet, and Kathy acting way too suspicious for my liking. Every time I tried to get to the bottom of it, she brushed it off with some vague excuse. I'd let it go, but only because I figured it wasn't worth the argument. Now, though, she was dangling the truth in front of me like bait on a hook. I tried to keep my cool. So, you're saying if I help you embarrass both of us in front of half the town, you'll finally come clean about Christmas? Exactly, she said, grinning like she'd already won. This was the thing about Kathy. She knew just how to push my buttons, and while part of me wanted to tell her there was no way I was going to be her ventriloquist sidekick, another part of me couldn't resist the chance to solve the mystery that had been eating at me for months. But agreeing wasn't going to make this easy. For starters, Kathy's idea of comedy was questionable, to say the least. Her jokes felt like they were pulled straight out of a 1980s joke book, and her delivery? Let's just say her dummy had more personality than she did. And then there was the dummy itself. The more I looked at it, the more I felt like it was staring back at me. It gave off this unsettling vibe, like it had its own little secrets, and I couldn't shake the feeling that agreeing to this whole thing might open a can of worms I wasn't ready for. By the time I reluctantly agreed, Kathy was already buzzing with excitement. She dragged me into the dining room, which she'd apparently transformed into her practice studio. There was a small stage made from a few stacked boxes, a cheap spotlight clipped to a chair, and that creepy dummy sitting in the center like it was the star of the show, involving the dummy making bad jokes about the weather, my stepmom responding in a forced laugh, and me standing off to the side, holding a giant cardboard cutout of a sun. She'd made it herself, complete with glitter and googly eyes. I couldn't decide if I wanted to laugh or crawl under the table. Kathy, I said, lowering the cutout, this isn't going to work. But she wasn't listening. She was too busy arguing with the dummy. Yes, you heard that right. She'd slipped so deep into her role that she was full-on bickering with the puppet, as if it had a mind of its own. Don't be such a diva, Charlie, she snapped, adjusting its bow tie. I froze. Wait, you named it Charlie? Of course, she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. That's when it hit me. Kathy wasn't just treating this like a fun little hobby. She was serious, and as much as I wanted to back out, the curiosity about what really happened last Christmas was gnawing at me. But things took an even weirder turn that night. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint tapping sound. Groggy, I wandered into the dining room, and there it was. Charlie, sitting on the edge of the box stage, turned ever so slightly toward the doorway. The room was empty, but for some reason I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. I stood there in the dark dining room, my heart racing as I stared at Charlie. The dummy's head was tilted slightly, its glossy painted eyes catching the faint moonlight streaming through the window. It felt like it was looking right at me. I knew it was impossible. It was just a lifeless puppet. But in that moment, I couldn't shake the eerie sensation that something was off. Kathy? I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. The house was dead silent. I took a hesitant step forward, my bare feet brushing against the cold floor. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. Charlie's bow tie, the one Kathy had been so proud of earlier, was gone. It had been neatly placed on the box beside him, as if someone, or something, had taken it off. Okay, maybe Kathy had been messing around with the dummy before bed and forgot about it. That seemed logical, right? But then I spotted something else that made my stomach twist. A small crumpled note tucked under the edge of the stage. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly. The handwriting wasn't Kathy's. It was uneven and jagged, like it had been scrawled in a hurry. The note read, "He's watching you." My breath caught. I spun around, half expecting someone, or something, to be standing behind me. But the room was empty. I bolted upstairs to Kathy's room, clutching the note tightly. She was sound asleep, snoring softly, completely oblivious to the chaos unraveling downstairs. I shook her awake, trying to keep my voice steady. "Kathy, wake up. There's something seriously wrong with your dummy," I said, holding up the note. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked confused. But then her expression changed, like she'd been caught hiding something. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice too calm, too measured. "You tell me," I shot back. "Did you write this? Is this part of some weird prank to get me to take this talent show thing seriously?" She hesitated, and that's when I knew something was up. "I didn't write it," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Before I could press her further, there was a loud thud from downstairs. We both froze, our eyes locked. "Stay here," she whispered, grabbing her phone as she got out of bed. But I couldn't just stay put. Whatever was happening, I needed to know the truth. And as we crept back downstairs together, I had the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger and much stranger than either of us had bargained for. Kathy and I crept downstairs, every creak of the floorboards making my pulse race. She held her phone like a flashlight, the dim glow barely piercing the darkness. The dining room was just ahead, but something felt different. The air was heavier, almost stifling, like the house itself was holding its breath. As we stepped into the room, I immediately noticed Charlie wasn't where I'd left him. The box stage was empty, the dummy nowhere in sight. My stomach flipped. "Where is it?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Kathy didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on something across the room. I followed her eyes and froze. There, sitting in one of the dining chairs, was Charlie. His head was tilted at an odd angle, and his tiny wooden hand was pointing toward the closet door in the corner. "I didn't put him there," Kathy said, her voice barely audible. Neither did I. We stood there, paralyzed, as the closet door creaked open, just a crack. My breath hitched, and every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't move. Kathy grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Don't, she whispered. But something compelled me to step forward. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the closet door. Slowly, I pulled it open, half expecting to find some hidden prank or an elaborate setup. Instead, there was an old wooden box sitting on the floor, covered in dust. "What is this?" I asked, glancing back at Kathy. She looked pale, almost as if she recognized it, but didn't want to admit it. I opened the box and my breath caught. Inside were letters, photos, and, this is where it gets crazy, a small, identical version of Charlie. This one was older, more worn, but unmistakably the same dummy. Kathy let out a sharp gasp. "I thought I got rid of that years ago," she said, her voice shaking. "Got rid of it? What are you talking about?" I demanded. She hesitated, then finally confessed. "That dummy, the original Charlie, it belonged to my grandmother. She always said it was cursed. I thought it was just a silly family story, but weird things started happening after I brought it home. I tried to get rid of it, but..." Before she could finish, the lights flickered and a cold breeze swept through the room. When we looked back at the chair, Charlie was gone, and that's when I realized we weren't alone. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that makes every little sound feel like a shout. Kathy and I stood frozen, staring at the empty chair where Charlie had been just moments ago. The air felt colder now, like something unseen was lingering, watching. My heart pounded as I turned to Kathy, searching her face for answers. "We have to get rid of it," she said finally, her voice firm but laced with fear. "Get rid of what? The dummy? Both of them?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. She nodded, her hands trembling. "All of it. The new one, the old one, everything tied to it. My grandmother always said that if you invite Charlie in, you have to send him away properly, or he doesn't leave." I didn't have time to ask what she meant. Kathy grabbed the older dummy from the box, her hands shaking, and shoved it into my arms. "We'll take them to the fire pit," she said, her voice clipped. Within minutes, we were outside, the cold night air biting at our skin. Kathy piled both dummies into the fire pit, along with the letters and photos from the box. I hesitated for a moment, watching the lifeless figures as they lay there. They were just objects, weren't they? Pieces of wood and fabric. But as I looked at them, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were more than that. Something darker, something we didn't understand. Kathy lit a match and dropped it onto the pile. The fire roared to life, the flames crackling as they consumed everything. For a moment, it felt like the tension lifted, like the air wasn't as heavy anymore. But then, as the fire burned, I thought I heard something, a faint laugh, carried by the wind. I looked at Kathy, but she shook her head, refusing to acknowledge it. The next morning, the fire pit was empty, not even ashes left behind. Kathy and I didn't talk much about it after that, but she finally told me what happened last Christmas. Turns out, it wasn't nearly as dramatic as I'd imagined, just a mix-up with gifts and a little family drama. Life went back to normal, but every now and then, I catch Kathy glancing at empty corners or double-checking closet doors. And sometimes, late at night, I still think I hear that faint, eerie laugh echoing through the house. I tell myself it's just my imagination. At least, I hope it is.